Today on the show, I have the great pleasure to welcome Lars Tvede. Hi, Lars. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you, and thank you for pronouncing my second name right, because you speak Danish and I'm Danish.
Jeg taler lidt dansk, og jeg elsker det her sprog. Yeah. So, Lars, you have an impressive background. You're a chief investment officer, you're an entrepreneur, and you're a best-selling author. You co-founded, 13 companies in the past 30 years and written 17 books, I think.
That is correct, and number 18 coming out in April.
So you have a background as an engineer, and you studied also business.
That is correct, Bachelor of Business, and then I had some education also in financial trading.
I understand you like skiing. That's strange for a Dane, isn't it?
I don't know, I don't think it has been strange for a Dane in my lifetime, but when I was young, we used to go mainly to St. Anton, and I had this dream that one day I would actually be able to ski a lot more, and at that time I had no idea I would end up in Switzerland, but that was something I'm really happy about.
Where are you doing the interview from?
I'm in Verbier right now, enjoying the never-ending sun we have here.
I know you have your 18th book coming out soon. So what are the big trends in technology and which impact could they have on our world?
There's a very big meta trend that has been going on, especially since the 1980s, which I define as the beginning of the precision economy. So just to put this term into perspective, first we had the Malthusian economy where GDP per capita didn't really grow. Then we got the industrial era. And then the precision economy started around 1980. And you see that in many statistics where the consumption of most commodities just decoupled from GDP. For instance, if you look at the American economy, you can see that GDP per capita kept rising through the 1980s until today, but the consumption of water, fertilizer, industrial materials, and so on flatlined. If you look at the whole world, you can see that around 1980, our agricultural land started pretty much reaching a plateau. And according to FAO, it peaked around 2000 to 2002 and is now declining. So this is about digital economy, and it's about precision in engineering of biology. So we are inside this, and that means that most of what we do gets more compact. And we are doing this interview using smartphones, actually, which is an excellent example that everybody knows, that if everything that drives a smartphone and is inside a smartphone, so the degree that it was possible at all in 1980, it would fill a whole house. This is so compact now. We will see some of this continue the coming decades. One sector that will really take the lead is in food production. The farmland has flatlined. And this is a time where we've doubled the world population, and average nutrition amount and quality per capita has also gone up quite massively. Too much in many cases, and yet we've done that. So we cut the farmland per capita by about half. But there are some radical new technologies where we can cut it even to something like 95% from where we are now. You have vertical farming. There's a very big project described for Switzerland, one of the biggest in the world, where you have vegetables growing stacked on top of each other inside buildings and with many growing seasons throughout the year and so on. And this can reduce farmland per produced unit by a factor of up to 300. I actually calculated that you could feed all of Switzerland using only 0.3% of the Swiss landmass. That would be if everybody were vegans, which is completely unrealistic. But then if we look at meat consumption, you have the cultured meat, which is a fairly complex technology, but it's breaking through these years. Every year we'll see new products made with the cultured meat where you grow meat cells in steel containers. So they're actually not growing on an animal. And this is also something that's far more compact than what it replaces. If all meat production in the US was produced in this way, we could free up natural land equal to 6 times the area of Germany, so make natural parks. And then even more radical is perhaps precision fermentation. So precision fermentation is something that pharmaceutical companies have been using for some decades to make very expensive components of some medical compounds. Now, this has become cheaper and cheaper, and then we started using it for elements of very expensive cosmetics and then elements of food, like food ingredients and so on. But it's getting so cheap these years that you can actually make food with it. It's quite possible that we'll see the world's food production over the next 50 years becoming so compact that will really see the global farmland drop, which actually has a lot of implications for a lot of sectors, including finance for the farming. That stuff is getting more compact in so many ways, but we have one big exception, which is in this energy conversion that the world is struggling with right now. So that energy conversion is not going well at all. If you go back 20 years ago, fossil fuel constituted about 87% of the total world energy supply. Since then, we have invested about $5 trillion in renewable energy, and that has brought the number down from 87 to 84%. But meanwhile, the global energy consumption has grown by a compound average growth rate about 2.6%. And that means that the fossil fuel economy grows and grows and grows, and we are nowhere near reversing that trend. And if we keep going the same way as we've been doing so far, we will use far, far more fossil fuel in 2050 and in year 2100 as we do today.
That doesn't sound like a good news at all when we look at the climate change. That's not very optimistic on that side.
No, this in isolation is not very optimistic. The problem here is that if you look at what we are doing, we are going against the meta trend of having more and more compact technologies. But because, for instance, offshore windmills, they use many square kilometers to produce the same amount of energy as a very compact gas power plant or a nuclear power plant. And also they use about 15 times as much industrial metal. If you take a solar power, it also uses a lot of industrial metal. If you take electric cars, they use between 5 and 7 times as much industrial metal as what they replace. So we are basically replacing quite compact technology with something that is massively bigger. And this can only scale so much. One of the problems here is that the mining industry has not invested nearly enough to accommodate ambitious plans to do massive rollout of renewables.
Are you saying that basically the beautiful plans we had to curb carbon emissions are just wishful thinking? Because in reality, everything takes more place, more resources to build, and we're not going to get out of that circle.
The problem is that we are too one-sided in our focus on renewables. So the technologies will emerge one after another. It's important that we look at what makes sense where and what makes sense now. So if we look at what makes sense where, so me being from Denmark, wind power definitely makes sense now in Denmark because Denmark has a lot of wind. And when there's a surplus, we can pump up water in Norwegian dams and so on. Many places in the world, including Switzerland, it makes a lot less sense because Switzerland either has hurricane or no wind most of the time. So everybody have to look at what makes sense where they are. But the big impact we can have is shifting from coal to gas. And for instance, when the United States didn't sign the Paris Agreement, there was an uproar and everybody hated them for not doing it. But which was the only country who actually fulfilled the commitments that were expected in the Paris Agreement? That was America. And that was because of fracking. They were moving from coal to gas. So coal to gas, this is not a movement to something that's perfect, but it's a movement that's very scalable to something that is better. Another thing is to use natural carbon sinks, which is something that can be done quite quickly. So it only goes so far because if you grow more forest, it absorbs carbon up to a certain level and then the forest has reached its new size and then that stops. But it's a quite good intermediate technology. What I think is the only technology that can really do the job in the long term is nuclear. And nuclear has a very, very bad reputation, but people are very often not aware of the new technologies that have been developed and are in the pipeline, which of course, most important and available in a very short term is more nuclear reactors. And the United States, Rolls-Royce in UK, Korean companies, Japanese, are building and designing these, and they can be rolled out very fast.
But nuclear is an incredible source of power, but it also represents risks. And when these risks take place, then everything is completely unusable for the next 1,000 years.
If you look at the actual risks of nuclear, in terms of safety, it's about the same level as wind and solar. So it's one of the safest energy resources that we've had so far. And it's about 1,000 times as safe as coal. A lot of coal has been burned because we were afraid of nuclear, even though coal actually is far more dangerous. So our experience with nuclear is based largely on nuclear technologies that were rolled out in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And we are a completely different place now. So we can make a passive security in nuclear reactors. It is really, really safe in the new technologies. And there are
But Lars, how long does it take to build a nuclear plant? For the transition, that's very long.
Yes, that's another misperception that is out there. So for instance, why Denmark has become quite famous for building out a big wind capacity.
Yep.
And is often shown as a leading country in the world in green energy transition. The actual reality is that 10% of the Danish energy supply comes from wind and solar. 90% comes from burning oil, gas, coal, and biomass. And if Denmark keeps rolling out wind and solar with the speed they've done the last 20 years, they will have 100% renewable by year 2150. It's going so slow. And meanwhile, while Denmark has been doing this, the Emirates have rolled out 4 times as big nuclear power capacity. And so the Koreans can set up a nuclear power plant in 4 years. So the stories we have about how long time it takes to roll out nuclear is based on the old technologies, not the new modular ways. So when you use nuclear reactors in a factory and ship them out or drive them out to their destination, you can do it really, really quickly. And ultimately, I have quite good relationship with some of the companies that design these reactors. I have no commercial or investment relationship. I just talk with the people. They say ultimately we should be able to build a reactor a day in a factory, just like during World War II when you needed a lot of bombers. Then you converted car factories to build bombers, and you were building mass producing them at an amazing speed. And you can do this with new.
There's many other big trends in technology, but on that energy part, basically your message is a nuclear energy is the solution in your mind. Is that what I have to understand from your point?
Yes, if you look at sort of end game in this, I think it will be nuclear and building integrated solar panels. Because building integrated solar panels actually don't take up space because they just constitute the material, the surface that you need anyway. These technologies are also evolving very quickly.
Do we have what it takes to build the solar panels in Europe?
So far, some components like the wafers and solar panels, 98% or 97% is built in China. If you look at the other elements of solar panels, it's between 70 and 80% or 85%. So it's almost entirely built in China. So we have a geopolitical risk in that sense. We could do it in Europe, but it's just, one of the jokes is that it's built in China because you have cheap, efficient labor in China, but also because they actually use coal power, because it takes a lot of power to build these things. And just as well as it takes a lot of power to build electric cars. So typically electric cars, they only pay back the CO2 emissions, or they have saved equal to the CO2 emissions that went into building them once they've driven about 120,000 kilometers or something like that. When we try to solve these problems with very big machines, heavy machines, we are front-loading CO2 emissions in order to save it at a later point. Just final note on nuclear. China has built and plans to build one more thorium reactor, which is a very, very safe technology where you use thorium, which is so abundant, almost any country has enough to serve itself. In the US, a company sponsored by Bill Gates is building a traveling wave reactor where they can reuse all the nuclear waste, and they expect to be able to power America for 800 years entirely just by reusing nuclear waste. And then there are 24 projects in the world with nuclear fusion, which is by far the safest. This is the same technology as the sun. It's very difficult to get to work, but eventually it will work, and there's a kind of a Moore's law where the efficiency doubles every 26 months. It's fairly few years from working on an experimental basis, and then it will take maybe 15 years until we have it. There we will have enough fuel to power the world for several billion years. And the waste is helium, which you use to blow up balloons at children's parties. So help is on the way. We can hear cavalry behind the horizon. These technologies are coming, and in the second part of this century, we'll address it entirely with that, I think.
So that's on the energy side, and you bring a bit of optimism there. Now I'd like to touch on other technologies, such as the famous Metaverse. Do you have any take on that? Where do you see this going?
The Metaverse so far has been disappointing. The one big commercial breakthrough has been the big deal that Microsoft got selling is actually enhanced reality goggles to the American military for, I think it was $19 billion or something like that.
It was not a big success. to say the least.
Yeah, but they still got the contract, though, after it had been tested. It must have been, to some degree, a success at least. The biggest failure is probably when we saw Mark Zuckerberg without legs in his Metaverse. I think the Metaverse eventually will find its footing and become a big thing. I think that it's some years away still. What is really right in front of us is AI, of course. By some measures, AI, the new ChatGPT and others, seem pretty close to passing a Turing test. Yesterday, I was about to actually post, but I didn't post on Twitter. As a test user, you can use ChatGPT. And there was this guy who was critical of ChatGPT, writing something quite offensive about it. And then it wrote that it could expose details about this person's life. So it was actually making a threat against this person. And then I thought, didn't it just pass a Turing test right there? I mean, that seems like a very human to act irrationally like that. I'm co-owner, founder, and chairman, board member of a company called Supertrends, where we map innovation in the world. And we have mapped all human and pre-human innovation. So we have the top 12,000 innovations of all time. And we think a lot about what are the most important ones, control of fire and the wheel and so on. I think that if I should take the top 10 in the entire human history, I might consider to add AI. Before that would be the internet, personal computer, electricity, steam engine, and so on. AI is so radical because we will start to get intelligence which develops more intelligence. So recursive intelligence is beginning right now.
Singularity is coming, actually, where AI goes beyond the human capabilities.
Yes, I think we should think of the singularity as a single point in time, because even when I was very young, I had a Casio calculator when I was at the university, which could calculate things much faster than I could do. I was surpassed by a computer then, and this is many years ago, but the creative capabilities and the ability to write software and the ability to ask intelligent questions, not only answer questions, makes it very different. So one thing that's very important, that with AI, computers can do automatic hypothesis generation. They can study information and then they can come with valid hypotheses. This has been used for quite some years now, but it's getting very extreme. So there was an example. This was by IBM quite some years ago. I think it was in 2014, where they had a computer read more than 100,000 different scientific papers about a protein that is relevant for cancer. And then they asked it to propose some ways to use this knowledge to find treatments for cancer. And it came out with a number of proposals. And they made this deliberate cutout. And then they looked at what have scientists after that cutout date actually discovered. And it turned out that most of what we had suggested had been tested later on by scientists and had been found to be valid. But the interesting thing is that the computer goes in and studies enormous amount of material and then thinks about what can work. You use it now in the pharmaceutical industry, where with the computers you study how proteins fold in 3D, and then you create hypotheses about how you create new medications and so on. This is taking epic proportions, and in our company, Supertrends is fairly small, but we have 11 AI projects. We use AI to natural language processing to read scientific news from a large number of credible databases and then write summaries. And we have people checking the summaries. Then we use AI to suggest tagging. We have people checking the tagging, but we also want to use AI to simply search in our database and give an answer. So our database is kind of similar to Bloomberg, but Bloomberg is, live database of financial information. Ours is a live database of innovation information, but we want people to be able to talk with it. So if you want to go into a meeting about the metal sink or about 3D printing of food, and just before you leave, you could just ask the computer, which technologies will impact the market for zinc? And then you get a report tracking all the different databases and sources and predictions and news stories and so on that we have, and similar for other things.
So you have developed your own ChatGPT, basically. Does it use machine learning? Did you create a whole neural network?
So we don't develop artificial intelligence. We use different off-the-shelf tools, and there are lots of them. And some of them are good for making illustrations. Some are good for natural language processing. some for writing code and so on. So we use the ones that are relevant for what we need to do. But the interesting thing is that this is cheap. So this is similar to when the internet came out and companies had to figure out how to use the internet. The challenge was in the beginning to figure out how to use it, but actually using it was not expensive.
You took a different AI systems, you connect to them, and you put your own system on top of that to bring your own knowledge in there.
Yeah, we train the AI to solve a task for us. Let's say that if you want to use AI to be an artificial receptionist, so a chatbot for a specific company, it takes something like typically 2 months to train it for that. Even though the data is far more sophisticated, all the data is available in written material, so we can train it faster. But what would take 100 people a year ago, we can do with 5. That this is improvement of our productivity of a factor of 20. That doesn't mean that we plan to fire anybody, but we plan to massively increase what we can deliver to the clients.
Question on how you train AI. So basically, how does that work? You have these external AI systems, and then you train them. You give your own content to them. Do they own then that content, or do you still keep the IP on that content?
No, we still own the content. Our use of AI works entirely within what's called a walled garden in IT. So we have this closed database. There's a 3-step process, if not more steps, but you have the wide world of data. Some of this data is extremely well organized, like Crunchbase, which is a database of startup companies, Twitter, and so on. Scientific news databases, but you also have what you find if you just do a Google search and so on. So all of this data, we bring it into our walled garden where we structure it and we tag it. And we use AI to help us bring it in there. But once it's in there and people want to communicate with it, we have to train AI to deliver a result in a nice format. So let's say I work for Glencore and I'm planning to have a meeting with Glencore, and I want to know about which technologies will impact the supply and demand of zinc the next 10 years. I want to be able to ask the computer this question, and then I want a nicely structured report with graphs and overviews and a timeline of future events and so on. So you train the AI to deliver it in a desirable format. And that is not such a big task. And once you've done that, it just can do it all the time.
Basically, AI is an external company. So you have now structured a whole set of information that you provide. AI learns, and you see in which format you want it to return the reports. But how do you know that this AI now has learned? They have all the information from your company. They are able to create these reports. Do you keep the IP of all that input, or does that new AI now have it?
No, they don't have it. Let's say you use DALL-E, for instance, to say, can you make a painting of a pink elephant climbing the Eiffel Tower in the style of Picasso? It can do that. It can do it in the style of Picasso because it has looked at lots and lots of tagged paintings in the style of Picasso. It does not have a single painting in the style of Picasso in its memory. What it has in the memory is information about how he works, but it doesn't have the actual paintings. And this is one reason why it avoids a big copyright issue when it does these kind of things.
I have a few friends of mine who are artists. They were reacting very, very strongly with AI. But that would be a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do another interview on the topic. But what about the blockchain? Do you have an idea on that technology? Where is this going to?
I'm not really an expert of blockchain, even though I'm a good friend of Niklas Nikolajsen, who is the founder of Bitcoin Swiss. The way blockchain has evolved has been very, very different from what we normally see with new core technologies. Normally, when you have a new core technology, for instance, Marconi's and other people's invention of radio technologies, for a long time, you don't have great applications for it. And this is because the people who develop the core technology are nerds, they're engineers, and the people who have to make the applications are typically very, very different personality, and you need different business models. And then you get into this valley of disappointment, and then the applications come. Where blockchain is really unusual is that it came with a killer app bundled in. So Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain at the same time. We have Crypto Valley stretching from Zug to other crypto centers around the world. Lots of companies are working on lots and lots of ideas. As far as I can see, still with a massive overweight it is all about cryptocurrency still. You have Ethereum, you have Concord, which is led by one of my other friends, Lars Tvede.
Lars Tvede Christensen, yeah.
By the way, he's also a shareholder in Supertrends, so we work quite closely together. You have implementations where you can use blockchain in very, very smart ways.
And you speak about smart ways, and the famous smart contracts can really make it to challenge actually even insurance companies and banking. You can create your own little bank thanks to a smart contract. That's quite a revolution.
Yeah, in many ways. So let's say the shipping container arrives in Rotterdam Harbor, and via GPS it knows it's there, and then it sends a message, I arrived safely, and then it triggers some kind of payments, perhaps a termination of an insurance contract or the likes. Eventually, there will be a massive amounts of similar things. In Hong Kong, they have tested using smart money that expire. And you can use money that can only be used for, let's say, you've gone through COVID and all the restaurants are like this. You could release money that could only be used for restaurants for like 3 months. You have all these possibilities. So eventually, it is the internet of value, and eventually it will be very, very big. But I think it goes through this valley of inflated expectations and then disappointment, and then come back to much higher
productivity.
Level. Yeah, it will be like a black slope in Switzerland. And we are in the middle of it, I think, right now. It will come up much, much stronger. When you hear often very intelligent, very skilled people completely downplay or even condemn cryptocurrencies, they're missing some of the point. For instance, when they say Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies have no value, no intrinsic value, well, dollars and euros and Swiss francs have no intrinsic value. It's based on network effect. So John Law, who introduced paper money in Europe, it's been well known, and it was described by John Law that money is not what you trade things for, but what you trade things by. So when you had gold coins, you actually traded for it because there was an intrinsic value in gold. You could use it for jewelry and whatnot. But fiat money have had it for a long time, and crypto is also fiat money. It's just private. There's a challenge in this. I'm fairly libertarian in many ways. That's one of the reasons why I live in libertarian Switzerland.
And you're also Danish on top of that. I mean, quite open-minded country.
Yeah, I am actually a great fan of central banking. Well, I know that central banking has done a lot to stabilize the world economy. And the problem is that if central bank control become irrelevant, then I think the world economy will become far more unstable. The big value is not the ability to replace money created by central banks, but to just add smart money or tokens and smart contracts and so on.
Just a side remark there, Lars. If you have countries which have a good economy, it's well managed, the central banks play an important role. But some countries, I could say in Venezuela or Argentina or Zimbabwe, where the governments have had, let's say, some quite lenient approach to economy, where these central banks are not really serving the people. So there they have an alternative with cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, etc. So what you say applies maybe to developed and well-managed economies, but for other economies, might be good to have an alternative. Or
yes, it is, and it can have very great social value. Recently, the population of Ukraine has been one of the biggest users of cryptocurrencies. Exactly, because when there's complications in transferring value through normal means, they can use this.
Lebanon was using this a lot, or Latin America.
Yeah. And for instance, remittances from guest workers from Africa, for instance, who are working in America, Europe, they send often a substantial part of the money back to their family at great cost and with great delays, and probably also some risk of it getting stolen. And here you also have a great social benefit. This should also be brought into the equation.
I think we could talk about these very exciting technologies for quite a while, but now I would like to pick your brains on another topic which is very important to our viewers and to ourselves, actually, education. Now we have the tech. Is this going to influence education and the way we train people and educate the next generation?
First of all, the speed of technology is accelerating all the time. And that means that whatever we learn of technical information age faster and faster. And I saw a recent study that said that average time until what you learn in technical education is dated is down to 3 years. And that means that if you take a 5-year master's degree or a 7-year PhD, by the time you graduate, a lot of what you have learned in the process is already worthless or dated. Maybe it makes it more easy for you to understand what came after, but it gets dated so quickly. This speaks for shorter formal education, but also within organizations, corporate or public, that you should think more of helping your staff with education the same way as Spotify help us get music. And that means that you have snackable small education objects. And for instance, some companies have been very good at making this sea of these small information objects. And then if you go in and you find one object that's relevant for what you have to do now, so just-in-time information, then it says, if you like this, you probably also like that. So you have algorithm or AI that helps you navigate this. We have this old thinking where you have a career ladder and the organizations help you build your career ladder. You do this and you do that. We should think about that it gets more fluid. And instead of having this formal module-based system, that you have a more flow-based system where you can just flow from item to item and pick up the relevant information just in time. When it's just in time, it's far more motivating also. On a similar vein, you can also think about having a gig economy within a big corporation so that you can register as an employee, or if you are associated with the company in any way, even as a subcontractor, you register what your competences are and what your interests are. Could be anything from working at home or working in a specific country because you have a boyfriend, girlfriend there, or anything else. Then when they have tasks, they put it out. We have this new task and who are willing and able to work on that. This combines a number of different issues. First of all, when technology is changing so fast, it becomes more useful that people can move around and organize spontaneously in different ways very quickly. There's a rising demand for being able to work with different things and different places and so on. Instead of having formal boxes, you have something where you have lots of small objects and everybody can recombine them very quickly on the fly. And go back to Spotify. So Spotify have, I think, is 16 million songs, but it creates for me every day recommendation in the morning. Normally I do fitness training from 10 to 11. Spotify has figured that out. So it knows at that time I want music that's suitable for that.
But wait a second, Lars. First, some people like these boxes. I am in that box or that box. I know where I belong and I have this kind of safety. And second, Spotify was also questioned because the artist at the end said, well, we don't make much money. So if I use Spotify as an example for the gig economy, I'm just challenging you there. You're a libertarian, you said. So you bring a lot of freedom to the whole economy, but that can be scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, but I have several comments to this. We just came out with a book in Danish, which is now coming out in English, called From Malthus to Mars, which is about the future of technology and then how to organize companies for it. And I hate these management books that says, this is happening, everything is going this way. If you don't do this, you're dead. Because the world is very diverse. And for instance, many of these new fancy technologies are completely irrelevant for a Swiss watchmaker, because people buy Swiss watches because they're old-fashioned. You want them to be old-fashioned. Lots of what you think about in management has to be only that you think about. You think about whether a new trend is relevant, and for many it is, for some it isn't. Now, about the business model of Spotify, yeah, this is true. This says, I mean, there's an issue about the payment of the artist, but I'm talking about using the technology within a corporate environment. So using the technological features they have in order to enable people to find the information they need and in order to find the jobs that they would like to do and are capable of doing. And this doesn't change how much they're paid. It's just a way of being more efficient, creative.
You spoke about the career ladder earlier. You speak about the gig economy. Do you think that the companies will be the same in 10 years? We saw the great resignation. A lot of young, bright talents just said, well, I don't want to have these go climb up that ladder. What's going to happen next 10 years?
It will continue to move in that direction. There was a study of Generation Z, so this was a forecast, but the forecast said that the average person of Generation Z, which are the ones who were born between 1995 and 2010, I think, so ones who are about to join the labor market soon, or first of them are doing it now, but said they would on average have 6 different careers I think they would have 16 jobs and live 12 places, something like that. People are beginning to more think of life as a sequence of experiences. And it's not like you have to choose the education for the rest of your life. You can actually choose the education that will suit you the next 10 years. And within those 10 years, you can easily graduate to something different. And then after that to something different again, and so on. This is not going away. It's very attractive. My life has been like that. I've been in many different sectors and worked with many different things. And I educate myself, and that's perfectly...
Yeah, but wait, Lars, you don't exactly represent the regular worker. So for you, and it's excitement, you build several companies, cool, I get it. But for the people who have less of the flexibility, who might have less opportunities, that might be quite a big stress, a big change ahead. How do our societies react to that?
It is, and we have to recognize that lots of people don't want any of this. There has to be a role probably for people who don't want any of this. That again goes back to what I said about management books that say everything has to be in a special way. I like very much former McKinsey consultant who wrote the book Reinventing Organizations, also a very nice illustrated compendium about the book, where he describes 5 different basic forms of organizations that mankind has invented. He says that any company should be a combination of some of those. He's not saying that one is completely replacing another one. That's the way it is. If you take pharmaceutical companies or banks, they have compliance as a big thing. Compliance has to be very formal. It has to be centralized. Otherwise, you will make terrible mistakes. You also have marketing, and some parts of marketing probably benefits from being very big and going in scale. But then there are other parts of what they do where you have to have very, very adaptive, fluid systems and treat every client and every employee as a unique person, every corporate client as a completely segment of one. So you have to combine the two things. And this is, of course, demanding, but it's also full of opportunities.
So some kind of mass customization, delivering the individual solutions to the masses.
Just on that note, there's a dynamic that is changing when you do this. When I was studying business, I was brought up with marketing as a push mentality. So you sit there in a corporate and you define segments, big groups of people, and then you find push strategy, how to approach these people. But especially with AI and statistical algorithm running using the internet, the dynamic changes. Every client puts from you what they want. And for instance, the fact that Spotify delivers energetic music to me between 10 and 11 is because it has discovered that that's what I click on. That's what I wanted to listen to because I'm doing workout. So in that sense, we are moving more from a push strategy to a pull strategy, which requires a lot of smart computing.
You've been an entrepreneur for many years. Would you have some kind of advice to Gen Z, future workers, saying, hey, these are the key things you might want to look at to have a successful future?
My first piece of advice is very much run-of-the-mill, but it's very, very important. I think you have to go for intrinsic motivation. So you have 2 kinds of motivation. You have exterior motivations like prestige, money, other people's expectations for you. And then you have interior, which is basically either a higher purpose, something you really want to achieve because you feel it's good, or you love doing the task. You are far more likely to succeed if you can find something that has intrinsic motivation for you. So it's worth thinking about. It actually takes some time to find out what is your intrinsic motivation, which there are lots of tests you can take. What are my moral instincts? What is my personality? How do I learn? Do I learn by reading, writing, listening, speaking, doing physically? When do I feel flow? When do I ever experience something I do where I'm completely captivated by it and I forget time and place? All of this for a young person takes time to find out. But eventually, if you search, test yourself, try many different things, you'll find that. And then when you start an entrepreneurship project, it's really far best if you have this kind of feeling. Second thing is learn something about entrepreneurship as a craft. I've myself co-authored of a book, which is funny enough called Entrepreneur, what we learned from starting 30 companies. So this guy had actually started 30 companies by himself, but not to overdo it. We said I had started 13 and he had started 30. So we wrote that. We just put in really practical tools that you know about entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is very, very different from working in established organizations. There's just a lot of stuff you just need to know about. You can read about that so you can prepare yourself for what you go into.
You just touched on entrepreneurship and big companies. We had quite a few talents who had great careers in leading companies. When they transitioned to entrepreneurship, that was a big shock. Even though they are very bright, that shift, the agile methodology, the 80-20, this was a big learning for them, quite painful actually. Have you noticed anything like this?
We actually wrote about it in our book. So yes, I tried it. I have a daughter who's also a great entrepreneur. One day she comes to me and said, Dad, we had a top manager from, and then it's one of the biggest German companies, applying for a job. I was really surprised why she wanted to do it. And we explained it. So I find it odd. You think there's something wrong or whatever. And then I told her, you have to figure out exactly what is the motivation. But I just want to tell you that I have, from time to time in my 13 startups, hired people who came from big corporate. For me, every time it's been a disappointment. It doesn't have to be every time.
That's a big statement. Wow.
It starts with, if you work in a big corporate, your agenda is laid out for you. It's just full of meeting, your budget meeting, market meeting, product launch meetings, and so on. And you just go to this and manage that. But when you get into a startup, there's nothing in your agenda, like nothing at all. And you have to figure out, you have to invent everything yourself. There's no point in writing reports, because even if you did, nobody would have time to read them. But in many cases, there are nobody to read them. So also the fact that you have to go directly from idea to execution, try to execute really fast. And then if it doesn't work, you just do something else. It's very, very different. And also when the printer doesn't work, you have to fix it yourself. And in startups, you have to be available all waking hours, in weekends and holidays. If you don't want to be disturbed, you put your phone on silent. I don't know of weekends being different from work days in startups. And so many, many differences from the corporate life.
One thing I really saw from the difference with this corporate life, and these were really hardworking people, so not beginners, high level, very smart. But I think in a startup, obviously by definition, you're starting rather than well established. So you have a lot of things which are insecure and unfinalized. So you have to live with a lot of variables, a lot of things that are not fully fledged yet. That proved to me as quite a source of frustration for these people from big corporates.
Yeah, that's true. You're working with a massive amount of serious uncertainty. And probably if you really investigated statistically startups, you'll probably find that most of them sometimes operate without having certainty about their ability to pay their bills, which would be illegal, but they do it anyway. And like everybody just says, we can't have startups if we really go after that. But if you come from a big corporate where you have very strict compliance, and then you come into a startup and they don't know how to pay their salaries 9 weeks from now, you would say, oh, we have to close the company. We have to tell people that we are heading for bankruptcy. But great entrepreneurs, they don't think like that. They're just, we'll fix that. I'll find a way. And they hustle. This mentality is so different. Can feel extremely intimidating if you come from big corporate.
Great, Lars. I think we could go on for quite a while, but I would like to thank you for this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on entrepreneurship, on technology, education. And what can we wish you for the next times ahead?
You can wish me good luck with my company, Supertrans. There's no lack of hard labor and ideas, but we need good luck to really grow as quickly as we think we can.
Good luck to your company. All the best. Thanks for the great chat today. It was a pleasure. You take care.
Real pleasure. Take care.